And we return to a story that has been in the headlines all this week, the U.S. imposition of 10% tariffs on goods from mainland China. And those have far-reaching implications for Hong Kong's export economy. Hong Kong's Chamber of Commerce says businesses, though, they are prepared, even as the new levies threaten to disrupt global supply chains. This as Chinese exporters to the U.S. have started relocating their factories overseas. The government also expressing disapproval. It says Washington's tariffs on its products ignores the fact that Hong Kong is a separate customs territory, which is recognized by the World Trade Organization. And more on this, we're joined by Alejandro Reyes, adjunct professor for the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the University of Hong Kong. Professor Reyes, whether or not the WTO recognizes Hong Kong as an independent customs territory, U.S. has been very clear since at least July 2020 that it does not see Hong Kong as distinct from the Chinese mainland. Why should there be any question on this?
Well, indeed, in fact, it was earlier. The United States, during the presidency, the first administration of Donald Trump, passed and Trump signed into law the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which essentially made it clear that the United States' position was that Hong Kong was no longer enjoying the so-called high degree of autonomy from mainland China. And therefore, the United States, as far as the United States was concerned, Hong Kong was no longer as kind of separate administration from the mainland. And that has affected policies towards Hong Kong. And indeed, because of that was during the protests here in Hong Kong, and it did lead to the sanctioning of individuals here, including the sanctioning of our current chief executive. So the United States has gone its own way, whereas the international community, and indeed, as you mentioned, the World Trade Organization, still considers Hong Kong to be a separate trade jurisdiction.
Of course, Hong Kong may want to see itself in some ways as distinct from the Chinese mainland, but at least on the World Trade Organization, it has suggested that it might actually align itself with Beijing and file a complaint, also joining Beijing at the World Trade Organization. Given that Washington generally is also relatively dismissive of the World Trade Organization, what's the point of Hong Kong filing this claim?
Well, look, China is trying to present itself as continuing to operate or to recognize the rules-based international order. And the World Trade Organization is part of that in terms of an international organization that essentially manages or provides the rules of the road for multilateral trade. And so it is significant that the mainland, Beijing's reaction to the tariffs imposed by Donald Trump a few days ago, and indeed Hong Kong's, is to say, look, we'll go the route of, as any trading partner of the United States who has a grievance, will go to the World Trade Organization. Now, of course, the irony of that is that the United States has hobbled the World Trade Organization by preventing the dispute resolution mechanism from proceeding. So indeed, any action brought by China or Hong Kong to the WTO is likely never to get heard.
Of course, Hong Kong, though, not just showing its allegiance or its alignment with the rules-based global order, also making clear that at least the Secretary of Commerce and Economic Development coming out to say that despite disapproval of this hike in tariffs from the United States, it's in fact unlikely to have much of an impact on Hong Kong, with only 0.1% of Hong Kong's exports going to the United States, and very limited jewelry, broadcast equipment, certain electronics. This is in fact true, yes?
Yes. I mean, in 2023, the figure I've seen is exports from Hong Kong to the United States, about $35 billion, electrical equipment, machinery, jewelry, art. Now, of course, there might be Hong Kong businesses or investors that have companies that are exporting products from the mainland to the United States, and they would, of course, be affected. Possibly the most disruptive part of the action, the executive order, is that there might be goods from Hong Kong that have been entering the United States under the so-called de minimis allowance of products that are declared to have a value of under 800. They would go in normally duty-free, but that process has been closed down by the executive order as well.
Oh, of course, if Hong Kong, possibly a model for what happened to other countries that are not directly hit by a hike in tariffs. The Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area, just to quote some latest figures, less than 1% of the Chinese land mass, less than 5% of the population, but 1/9 of Greater China's total GDP as of 2023. Now, that region is not a service economy like Hong Kong. That region really goes big on manufacture and export. So that is where Hong Kong might be hit indirectly by hiking tariffs by the US on China.
Exactly. And indeed, this should be of concern, not just to, of course, Hong Kong, but to almost any investors who from anywhere who might be producing goods or products in mainland China, anywhere in mainland China, not just in the GBA, but are doing so for export to the United States market. They would be affected too.
All right, so there is reason for Hong Kong hoping that China and the US might actually reach a deal in the next few days before those tariffs by Beijing on the US take effect Monday next week. Last question.
Yeah, Canada and Mexico were affected. They were, Trump imposed 25% tariffs on its closest neighbors, its NAFTA 2.0 partners. And that was, roiled the markets. But very quickly, there was some effort to postpone those, and Trump agreed to postpone the imposition of those tariffs, much higher than the 10% on China. The tariffs on China are more than likely going to be imposed, unless, of course, there's some sort of deal that comes up. But I don't see that. I mean, the 10% is not all that great, and China has already responded. I would expect that perhaps there might be some discussions about building on the so-called phase one trade agreement that the first Trump administration came to with China, which was never really fully implemented. And China might make an undertaking to fully implement that, and then they might go beyond the phase one deal. That might be something that could happen, but I don't see that as happening anytime in the immediate future.
Oh, thank you, Professor Alejandro Reyes. I'll be quoting you here. We'll be looking for, and I quote you, method to the madness in the next few days. Professor Reyes, adjunct professor for the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the University of Hong Kong.